Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. So, last night, for the very first time, I watched a WNBA game. Now, I'm not necessarily proud of the fact that I've never watched a WNBA game before, but to be fair, I don't really watch very many NBA games either. So, I'm just more interested in high school and college basketball, that sort of thing. Interest in women's sports has really exploded in the last year. Now, there have been other things that have come before, like, the women's soccer team garnered a lot of interest in the past. And there have been sports like gymnastics that we've kind of always been interested in. But there really does sort of feel like a bit of a snowball effect of interest in women's sports. And this year in particular, it just seems like all of a sudden it just hit really hard. And I've mentioned this on the show before, but I'm from Nebraska. And last fall, the University of Nebraska Lincoln hosted a volleyball event in their football stadium. And it was completely sold out. They packed the crowd with like 90,000 people and they watched them play volleyball. It was just this huge event, broke all kinds of records, really big deal, right? So the interest in volleyball even got a professional volleyball league going. And it was just really exciting. And then there was Caitlin Clark. And so, she's the standout player. I heard of her last year, but I wasn't paying super close attention. But then this year, she started to break all these records, and it was like the whole world started watching. So I'm sure it wasn't the whole world, right? Whatever. But it was a whole lot more people that started watching women's basketball. So after breaking all these records and attendance records, point records, all kinds of things, that really kind of leads up to the fact that I watched a WNBA game last night because I was curious and I'm like, this is interesting. So I wonder what's going to, happen. What would it be like to watch uh, Caitlin Clark in her first WNBA game? So I watched this game and I'm like, wow, this is really fun. But it wasn't like Caitlin Clark did fine. She wasn't this huge standout. But what was interesting to me, what really stood out to me was another person who played for the other team, the Connecticut Sun, DeWanna Bonner. So DeWanna Bonner graduated from Auburn, standout there, and she came to the WNBA for a while, and she did really well. But then she took a whole year off in 2017 because she was pregnant. So she didn't play any of that season. And she had twins. She was even on bed rest for a whole month. Like, it was a big deal. But she gave birth to these twins. And then in 2018, she came back and played so well that she was voted into the All-Star game. Okay. This leads us to last night, where she broke another record and put herself in position to be the 5th all-time leading scorer of the WNBA, surpassing Candace Dupree's 6,895 points. And I'm like, whoa, this is so cool. I mean, I find it really interesting because, number one, I hadn't been paying attention. And how often does it happen that we're like not really paying attention and there's really cool things going on around us? So that was first thing. But the second thing that struck me was that a woman who's really good at her job had to sit out an entire year in order to have children. And yet she still came back and made this big splash and still continues to be a high performer years later. So historically, women in sports, when they've had an advertising deal or that sort of thing, if they get pregnant, they might just lose the deal. So there's lots of things going against women who want to, excel at their job, but also have a family. And what was cool about last night it was a reminder to me about how far we've come. So now there are women in the spotlight doing amazing things in sports and their jobs. And still, they have these points of time in their lives where they've had to step away or take care of something very human. They're valuable. These people are so valuable as team members, as people who are in our organizations. They're valuable as human beings and their families. to their friends and communities. And I just keep coming back to this mantra that I have, like, it has to be okay that we are human. It has to be okay that a woman who's of childbearing age, whose, biological clock is ticking, if you will, that they can still be really good at their job and still take a little time out in order to have children and come back and keep breaking records. Still continue at that high level of performance. And so I think that this is part of how we move forward as humans in the future of work, what it means to be a human at work. We have to have this mindset that it has to be okay that we are human. So employers, they need to have a mindset of, okay, you know what? It's got to be okay that people are human. We need to be supportive of their lives, because if we're supportive of them as a person, it just builds trust and loyalty. It builds all kinds of things, human connection. And it sets that person up for feeling safe in their work environment, feeling safe to be able to say what they need, and then be able to come back and perform at a really high level, still contribute something really significant. But it's also important for that person, those individuals who are working, to recognize that it has got to be okay that you are a human being. I mean, if mental health is a concern, if your physical health is a concern, if you are caregiving and you have somebody that you need to take care of, if it is really important to you, supporting family members, doing what you need to do to be there for them, you know what? That has to be okay. We have to find work and we have to be able to advocate for ourselves, because it has to be okay to be able to be fully human. When we have fully human people at work, we recognize that there's something really significant that happens around the unique things that make up our humanity, our creativity, our ability to solve problems and think critically and all those sorts of things, and to make real connections with people. All very important. How should those kind of conversations go down? Well, I think that when we're talking about this sort of negotiation, we need to come to the table first understanding that the other person has a different perspective than we do. So whether you're the employer or you're the person that needs that flexibility or that time off, you need to understand that the other person is coming with a different perspective. They have different priorities than you do, and they're responsible for different things than you are, and that's okay. So the first thing that we need to do is come with that understanding and recognize this for each other. Being able to say, look, I understand that you have these certain priorities and responsibilities that you're taking care of, and those are very important, just like the things that I'm bringing to the table are important. So let's start with that level of respect for our humanity and our level of responsibility, our perspectives. But then we need to come to the conversation and really establish a sense of goodwill. Sort of like, I want the company to thrive. I enjoy being a part of it. I am for the company. And I really like my job, and I want to make a difference. On the other side of that, you might be needing to communicate, I really do care about you as a person, as a human being. I would like to find a way to make this work. So you're working towards coming to that win-win situation. And you start with that respect and goodwill. And then you have to get really honest about acknowledging the impact. Okay, so, what would happen if I didn't do what I'm saying that I need? What would happen if I did? What would that impact be on the company? What would it be on the clients? What would it be on me? Let's take a good look and just be really honest about the full spectrum of impact that this could have. And by being honest about that impact, you can be more clear and know it, understand it. And you can kind of come to that conversation to have a more informed decision. So then whatever kinds of arrangements that you come to, payment, flexibility, leave of absence, whatever it might be, when you're starting to talk through those things, if you've already established that, hey, you know what, we really respect each other and our perspectives and the responsibilities that we each have, and we care about each other, we want each other to succeed. We are also recognizing and acknowledging this impact that different scenarios as they play out that they might have on different people. And then it's time to experiment. What if we tried this? So these sorts of arrangements, they really depend on the situation, but you can come up with an experiment. It doesn't have to be set in stone right away. So instead of coming up with a plan that this is the way it's going to be, this is how it's going to look, and that's the end of it. Great, we've made this arrangement, it's all done. You know, Sometimes that works, but a lot of times it's important to think of it as an experiment because you don't know for sure what's going to work for everybody involved. And you don't want to try something saying it's this way or the highway and then it doesn't work, because then all of a sudden the other option is only the highway. And that's not always what you really want. So you want to know, how could this work in the future? So what are those factors or those levers that you need to consider when you're coming up with an experiment? You have to figure out what those are. How are we going to measure this? And it needs to be a time-bound experiment. Let's say you decide to do it for a month or whatever time you feel like is appropriate. You come up with this initial plan, but that initial plan is just, you're going to set it in motion. This is what we're going to try. And then we're going to come back to it. We're not just going to let it go and then be like, we're not going to touch it again. Just hopefully everything's okay, because we're afraid. We're afraid of it not working or people being upset. No, you lean in as a leader. That is what we do. We lean into it and we say, you know what? We're going to come back to this and we're going to reevaluate, because we need to make sure that it continues to work for both of us. Then we can tweak and we can see how this goes. Tweak, evaluate based on productivity or whatever factors you've decided are important, and how the team's getting along maybe, or how you're feeling about work-life balance, whatever those factors are. Revisit it, make your tweaks, set another time-bound experiment. So we have to continue to experiment because we're all human and things keep changing. This is a dynamic work environment. It's a dynamic world. You're a dynamic human being. So things are always changing. So that's the reason why we need to look at this as an ongoing experiment. So let's see how it works. We'll tweak it as we go. And then after trying it for a few months or periods of time and you find that it's just not working, maybe it's time to part ways. Or maybe you figure out that, you know what, this feels like we're in a rhythm now. I think this is good. But you don't necessarily turn that into a policy that is set in stone, because you're not sure what's going to work in the future. Things keep changing. So again, you continue to look at it as an ongoing experiment. You maybe make the periods of time for evaluation a lot longer. This experiment's going to go for 6 months now instead of 1 month, or a whole year. We'll revisit it at the end of next year. However that timing works for you is fine, but you do want to keep coming back to it and consider it an experiment instead of drawing lines in the sand. So that's how you do it when you're a learning organization, when you are continuously learning. It's one of those pillars that it means to be a learning organization. It's experimentation and that willingness to continue on with that ongoing experiment to see what works, what's working now, what's working later. It's all going to keep changing. So that's what it means to be adaptable. It means what it means to be agile. We need to bring that to the employee-employer relationship too, especially as we're looking into the future. So I wanted to bring up that story with DeWanna Bonner as this great example of someone who was so valuable to her team, yet took a whole year off and then came back to continue to break records and be a high performer, just to kind of remind us that, dang, there are a lot of people out there with a lot to offer. And just because somebody goes through a season where they need a different arrangement doesn't mean that you have to give up on them. It could pay many, many dividends in the end by continuing to work with people. Hopefully this is helpful to you. But our company Voice of Influence, you know what? This is the kind of stuff we talk about, that we do, that we work with companies to do. We work with executive teams to become more aligned so that they have a similar way of approaching things, culture, business objectives, strategy, etc. We also have specific kinds of programming that can help you improve human skills, whether that be on the executive team level, manager level, or frontline level of workers. As we move into the future, we need to be better at communicating, having a voice, being able to solve problems together, work collaboratively, deal with conflict, de-escalate conflict, lead, all kinds of things that we can bring to the table. Programs that are proven, that have worked very well in companies that we would love to bring to your company as well. So you don't have to do this alone. And you don't have to feel like you should know everything. Your whole team or your HR function should know everything. Look, you don't. There's no way that any of us can know everything about our business. I mean, I'm constantly reaching out to others for help. So there's no shame in reaching out for help. We would love to support you. And look, we can help you figure out what it looks like to create an environment where people are truly engaged and want to stick around and even attract other workers to your company. So come to voiceofinfluence.net, hit that contact button, and send me a message. If you'd like, I would love to hear from you, and I would love to send you more information. Potentially just having a conversation about how things are going for you, how Voice of Influence might be able to support. So come to voiceofinfluence.net. Your voice matters, and you can make it matter more.